Dave Sethi is the Chief Operating Officer of Athletes.org and joins us today from North Carolina. Dave, welcome to Get a Load of This.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So given where you're sitting today in North Carolina, you're not in the DMV area where you normally are. We can't see the plaque that usually hangs above your head that says Irish country. So I want to start talking about being a Notre Dame fan. You're a proud grad of the school, and you were at the 2025 college football playoff title game. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what it was like to attend that game as a fan.
Yeah, so heartbreaking because Notre Dame lost, but still got to see a great championship game and almost would have been an epic comeback by the Irish. But, I was very fortunate to be able to attend a game of that gravitas in person, and the atmosphere was electric. Weirdly enough, Atlanta was extraordinarily cold that weekend, which I don't know if I fully expected. But, just the energy. I'm actually 0 for 2 in seeing Notre Dame in national championships because I was at the annihilation at the hands of Alabama over a decade before. So maybe I'm a bad luck charm, but I think similar to that game, just the beginning, the electricity in an environment when you have two rabid fan bases, both of whom are like seemingly starved to win a national championship, especially Notre Dame. It's an electricity that I rarely, if I've ever felt in other venues. So to be able to experience that this past January was awesome, even though Notre Dame subsequently lost. So
you were telling me that you were actually also at the previous college football title game, but you won a contest. What happened there? How did you end up at that game?
Yeah, it's really strange because, in my career, I've been very lucky to enjoy my fandom and go to a variety of sporting events across a number of different sports. But going to the national championship in 2024 was an experience like no other because I should not have been there for any particular reason other than having won a contest. So I'll try to keep this as brief as I can. It's a little bit involved, but it was November of 2023, and I was like at my computer or whatever on a Thursday night, and I get a DM request on Instagram, and the DM request is from the account Verbo, VRBO. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, clearly Verbo got hacked because why would they DM me on Instagram? But I'm intrigued. So I click on it and it said, hey Dave, we're reaching out to you because you have potentially won this college football fan contest, and I'm waiting for them to basically like, hey, what's your credit card number and your social security number? But I keep reading and I realized that in September, maybe that was August, that Verbo had run some contests on Instagram, and I'm trying to remember the exact name of it. It was College Football is All About Family, but it was spelled FANMILY. And the prompt on their Instagram,
okay.
Yeah, exactly. And the prompt was, post on this Instagram post or comment, your favorite football traditions for game day or whatever. And people are like, I do chili every Saturday before I watch a game or whatever the case may be. For me, my twin brother and a set of friends always take a college football road trip every fall. And so we've been to Notre Dame, we've been to Norman, Oklahoma, we've been to Baton Rouge. Like every fall we will plan something. And even though people have gotten married, have had kids, we still try and keep up this tradition of meeting for a game in a different place every year because I like checking items off my bucket list. And so we've gone to some awesome places. And I don't even remember having written this comment on this Instagram post 3 months before, but Verbo reached out and said, because of this paragraph that I wrote, I had potentially won this contest, of which the prize, which is shocking still to even say it out loud, was a trip to the Verbo-sponsored Fiesta Bowl in Arizona, which was on, I think, New Year's Eve.
Wow.
And that was between Oregon and Liberty, I think was the matchup. It was then a week in a Verbo in Scottsdale, Arizona. Nicest place I've ever stayed in my entire life. And then it was a trip from Arizona to Houston for the national championship and 3 nights in Houston. And not only was this like a 10-day extravaganza, but it was for me, and I could invite five other people. And
Five
so,
others?
yeah, so I had to
Man,
bring my twin brother and these friends who I've gone on these trips with to not only the Verbo sponsored Fiesta Bowl, but also the national championship, which, this is like a PSA, like, I guess enter contests because I remember entering this one and I miraculously won. But it was the trip
incredible.
of a lifetime, and I had no business winning this contest, let alone taking this trip. But fortunately, I've got a very kind and gracious spouse and partner who enabled me to take that trip, and she stayed at home to fend for herself with our dog. So, yeah, again, that was my 2024 national championship, which again I had no reason to be at. So,
That's pretty amazing. And it's one of those things that I think sports fans dream of, growing up. Like, I'm going to win tickets to something, but how many of us actually get to do that? And actually, on the topic of dreams, I know you were an athlete in addition to being a sports fan. And I wonder if when you were younger, whether that's in middle or high school or maybe even in college, you imagined working in sports itself for sports media and what you thought your dream job would be if you did that.
yeah, I never had any aspirations of working in the sports industry. I think growing up as a kid in the DC area, if you even conjured an idea of working in sports, it would probably be working for your favorite team, right? Like go work for, the Washington Bullets or Wizards or the Commanders, et cetera. And that was really the only notion I have of having worked, of what it meant to work in sports. And even if you had that idea, anything you would ever hear about working in sports was really twofold. One, crazy hours and really hard lifestyle, and two, don't actually go work for your favorite team because it might diminish your fandom to a degree. So I never
Mm-hmm.
had any compulsion to work in sports, and my career started in anything but the sports industry. I was, doing sales and consulting for Google, and really, my entrance into the industry was, as I like to say, through a side door, because about halfway through my tenure at Google is when I moved to the YouTube side of their organization. And that was when I started working in sports, albeit through the very specific lens of digital and social. So I consider myself incredibly fortunate. I know that I think that's one of the great things about working in the sports industry overall is so many people have different origin stories. And I like to share mine because where I started certainly was very different than the destination or career path that I've subsequently gone on. And it did not start in the most traditional sense when it comes to the sports industry.
Yeah, talking about YouTube, I mean, it was started in the mid aughts, but even in the early 2010s, we're still talking mostly what at that time we referred to as user generated content, individual people uploading things. But then there was the emergence of sort of more formal content also being put on YouTube with, I feel like there was a lot of consternation about like, will there be ads on professional content, user generated content? And I'm kind of wondering what it was like for you at the time navigating those relationships with leagues like the NHL or the NBA, having to talk to them about what does it mean to put your content on YouTube versus NBA.com, for example, and how you sort of navigated that, having not had that background, having worked at a league or having worked for a team.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're in 2025, and the notion of any of us, you and I, and our friends and family, going to a place like YouTube or Instagram and not finding our favorite athlete, our favorite media company, our favorite brand, our favorite team, it's unfathomable because they are all over the place, and those are the places that you consume most readily their content. But early 2010s, that was anything but. And I like to, yeah, and I like to draw that parallel because a lot's happened in really the past 10 to 15 years. I mean, when I joined YouTube, it was before there was even the ability to monetize on YouTube. Not nearly the amount of ads. There was a partner program that we had launched, but it was invite only, so you couldn't just start monetizing as soon as you created a channel. And the world was just very different, including the world of digital and social from the lens of an organization like the Celtics or the NBA, et cetera. Because as shocking as it might be to some of your listeners, dot coms were still a thing back in the early 2010s. If I wanted to check out the latest news and highlights and clips and perspectives about my favorite teams, I would go to WashingtonWizards.com. I would go to NBA.com, and sure, those are still things, but those were the primary endpoints for fans to engage with their favorite insert team or club or league here. And so the notion of in the early 2010s of any of those kinds of organizations or media companies or even athletes to freely distribute content that they spend money on to create on a platform that they don't own with data that isn't first party, that is frankly at that point in time a lot less developed or comprehensive than what you could get on your own website. And then in economics that were far less favorable than owning everything from A to Z on your own.com. That was a hard value proposition to address and to talk through. But that's where we were in the early 2010s. And I don't want to say it was all promise because millions, hundreds of millions, and subsequently billions of people go to these platforms. But you're having to illustrate to the sports industry, hey, like the trends are going in this direction. And so it behooves you to jump on this ship now, to start building your audience and community now, and to set that stage, because increasingly this will be one of the dominant places where fans and audiences spend their time, and it will be less so on your own owned and operated platforms. But the conversations were very different in the early 2010s, even so much as, the leagues like the NBA. NBA has always been a little more progressive, but certain leagues would actively take down content on these platforms so that fans like us would have to go to their .coms or consume them in other places besides these distributed platforms. And there's a lot that goes into those decisions, but the world was very different, and it's changed quite a bit in just the past 10 or 15 years.
There was that stage in between where there was the rise of like multi-channel networks, and then creators became a big part of the economy past, like you were just talking about, the professional leagues. And you ended up being in the middle of that too when you worked at Whistle Sports, building a community platform with groups like Dude Perfect. And I wonder if you could kind of build on what you were just talking about, the evolution of what YouTube content was and how suddenly we had these, I guess you could say, like medium tier creators, not, the biggest of brands, but still significant brands with followings that started to establish themselves, and how you got involved with that.
It was one of the, I think, greatest things that these social platforms like an Instagram or TikTok or YouTube, one of the greatest things that's occurred is essentially, let's call it the democratization of opportunity, of an opportunity for people like you and I to build a community, a fan base, to go directly to them and to nurture and cultivate that community to the extent that you can build a real business off of that, the same way that the ESPNs of the world do, right? And so that was, I like to say that I worked in the creator economy before that became a term, and I kind of cringe using that term to begin with, because back then the term creator was hardly used. I mean, even for us, it was YouTubers, right? Because that was really the primary, if not only, platform where you would create video content, whether it's a vlog in your basement or whether it's a produced video to put online. If you were, again, an average person like us, or, a group of 5 friends creating trick shots in Texas, that was the place that you were doing it. And so I was fortunate enough to be in the middle of it because you had people who were expressing themselves creatively through the use of video and using platforms like YouTube to get that content out into the world. And a lot of what we've seen as far as, ways in which media companies and leagues engage their fans, those practices are really established and codified by these quote unquote creators. The notion of listening to your fans and audiences and using their feedback to create compelling content that you're sort of creating that feedback loop and that cycle, et cetera. That was what a lot of these quote unquote creators were doing in the early 2010s. And so, yeah, I sort of got a lot of my start in working with some of those emerging creators who were starting to understand what it meant to turn their creativity and their passion into a potential profession and to make real money doing it. And when I moved to Whistle Sports, which, was sort of one part media company, one part multi-platform network, et cetera, was how do we help elevate what you're trying to do? How do we create different distribution points? How do we help you build and expand your audience and enhance what you're doing as a business? But it's incredible, again, to see this rise of creators over the past 10 or 15 years, because previously the notion of doing that as a full-time profession was unfathomable in the early 2010s. And now if you ask, I'd say the average teenager, my guess is on their short list of career aspirations, it would probably be being a creator. I have a
Hmm.
nephew, two nephews staying with me last week, who have set up their own Discord servers and who are live streaming their gameplay on Fortnite and figuring out ways to potentially monetize, map development on Minecraft. And it's like this entire ecosystem has blown up, but it's all really started through users like you and I, sort of creating that innovation or doing that innovation, and these platforms doing a better job over time of serving those people and helping them to build their businesses.
I like the phrase that you use. You said democratization of opportunity, but I think there's always that contrast with democratization of outcome. And I imagine some of your role at Whistle and as well as some of the other platforms that you worked at was helping people bridge that gap from what the opportunity is to how to maximize outcome. Are there things that you learned from that beyond, of course, being able to spend money on advertising or outreach that really helped individual creators or groups of creators stand out?
I think what people learned, whether it was through observation or through experience, was just how much things can change, evolve, and de-evolve when it comes to building businesses on other people's platforms. In some ways, people investing early days in a platform like YouTube paid massive dividends because they got started early. They built up huge audiences, built it on top of itself, consistently, thoroughly, etc. But think about what happened in the mid 2010s when people tried doing the same thing on platforms like Facebook, and all it takes is a tweak of an algorithm for the faucet of audience to, if not stop, to go from a steady pour to a slow drip. And that is one of the potential outcomes when you are building on some place or something else that isn't your own, that you have less control over, and on. And so I think what we try to encourage, what I tried to encourage even when I was on the platform side, let alone the media side, was to, let's call it, diversify, for lack of a better term, because you can sort of hedge your, you can sort of hedge your dependency on one specific place or thing. And if you're able to create a value proposition across different platforms, et cetera, all the better for you, because you're building different and potentially disparate audiences at different endpoints, so that you're never truly over reliant on one place that at any given moment in time could flip a switch and dramatically change how you reach and engage your audience. And some of those fears or some of those outcomes are a little bit overblown at times, but I think the reality is, and just ask any media company that turned on the Facebook faucet in the mid 2010s, they faced a very rude awakening later that decade. And we saw businesses being built and businesses being destroyed because they were being built on platforms like that, that could have changed their algorithm or could have changed who they wanted to serve, whether they prioritize creators over businesses, as an example. All of those things, none of us have control over. What we do have control over is how we, again, sort of hedge and how we spend our time and resources creating, just creating a more diversified business.
You were talking about Facebook, and you spent yourself 5 years working at Instagram and Meta. And you were there in 2021 when athletes' ability to make money transformed with the new name, image, and likeness opportunities that were suddenly legalized. How did that changing framework and the laws around it transform the work that you yourself were doing?
So when I joined Instagram in summer of 2018, it was to lead their sports partnerships group. And when we talk about sports, we talk about this ecosystem of athletes, teams, leagues, creators, media companies, really the sort of five pillars, let's call them. And how do you act as a bridge between the sports industry and that group, and their priorities or their challenges or their opportunities with what our company cares about and who we're trying to serve. And really, Instagram's main priorities at the time, and I would argue continue today, are to be relevant to young people and to be relevant to quote unquote creators. Those are two pillars of which Adam Nasseri talks about, consistently as far as who he tries to serve, and how Instagram will continue to be relevant into the long-term future is by being relevant to the proverbial next generation consistently. And that's what Instagram has been known for, right? Being relevant for young people. So I was overseeing that practice, and it was, it's kind of cool to say that me being a fan is what helped me take a different direction in my career, or at least my career at Meta at the time, which was winter of 2020. As a fan, I'm paying close attention to college sports. You mentioned the Notre Dame sign that typically is behind my head, or it's on a logo of a shirt that I'm typically wearing too. But as a fan, I'm watching and listening and reading the news of college sports, and I'm starting to hear rumblings about this thing NIL and the Ed O'Bannon case from years ago, and this notion, that July of 2021 could be a thing in this industry. That thing no one was 100% sure about, but due to what the states were doing as far as legislation and some of the movements in the space, that in theory, summer of 21 could be this inflection point where college athletes could, for the first time, monetize their name, image, and likeness, whether it's through being in a video game or monetizing their YouTube channel or doing a brand deal with a local car wash. And this would be a watershed moment for college sports as we know it. And for me, following it as a sports fan, my wheels got turning as far as my work went. And in keeping with this idea of, well, if Instagram cares deeply about being relevant to young people and being relevant to creators, well, college athletes are sort of both of those things, right? They are technically young, and many of them are on this platform and aspire to build community, build fans, and even monetize those fans at some point. And so we took a hard turn that winter, and I was able to gain some resources to build a college athlete focused practice at Meta in preparation for what we now call the NIL era, which started in summer of 2021. And what that meant was focusing on really educating, informing, and empowering athletes at scale across the college athletics ecosystem to understand this notion of NIL, but more importantly for us, understand the power social media platforms like Instagram had in enabling or supporting college athletes' pursuits in the NIL era. Because the reality is the majority of college athletes, that is the mechanism or channel with which they can monetize their NIL, is to do a brand deal, or to click, for ads to run against your content, et cetera. And so we really focused on helping them understand, hey, on June 30th, half of what's on these platforms you're not even eligible for, but literally overnight, you will be eligible to use the totality of a platform like Instagram or Facebook or TikTok to benefit yourself through the lens of name, image, and likeness. And so I'm really proud of the work that we did in being ready for that moment. We were the first social media platform to focus on that part of the ecosystem, and the team that's still there still focuses on nurturing college athletes and helping them maximize their NIL, their college careers by leveraging, Instagram and Facebook, et cetera, for whatever adventure they choose in this era.
I want to talk about how that connects to the work that you do now, but just to take a moment.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Just to take a moment to sort of talk about the end of your personal era at Instagram and at Meta. You had this year of extremes in 2023 where within a month you were laid off from Meta as part of the mass layoffs that the company did. And you were also named to the Sports Business Journal's 40 Under 40, a great honor. What do you recall about that low and that high coming, within such a short time span, and how that impacted you and the way that you thought about your work?
Yeah, it was actually sort of the reverse of like the high and the low, because I received this unexpected honor a month before I was part of Meta's last round of layoffs. So for context for your audience, Meta, as well as many other tech companies, went through rounds of layoffs, basically between, let's call it fall of 2022 and summer-ish of 2023. And so I think Meta overall during that time period went through four rounds, if I remember correctly.
I
My
think you're right.
memory might be escaping me here, but so there was this pervasive, if not fear, this anxiety about, well, when is the shoe going to drop for however many employees who are working at this organization? And so through that lens, like I'm really proud of the work that our team did to continue fulfilling our remit during what was a really anxious time and a lot of people feeling like they were under duress and really being given every excuse by companies like Meta to not focus on their jobs, if I'm being honest. It was a lot easier to ride this out and just sort of play the waiting game if you knew that somebody was going to make a decision in some room about your fate, if you're a name on a spreadsheet, than it was to actually go about and pursue your remit passionately and vigorously. But fortunately, I worked with some incredible people who cared a lot about the work we were doing. And so we were able to continue that work throughout what was an extraordinarily volatile time, physically, spiritually, emotionally, etc. So it was April of 2023 when I got this unexpected industry acknowledgement and was told that I was going to be named to Sports Business Journal's 40 under 40. I know most people can't believe that I was under 40 at the time, but I was technically eligible, and I received this industry acknowledgement. And then in May, around Memorial Day, is when Meta went through their latest round of layoffs, of which I was a part of, as well as a few of my colleagues. And so it was obviously, the spectrum of emotions to go from one end of feeling like not only your company to a degree, but your industry has acknowledged the impact that you've had, of which again was completely unexpected, but I'm a very proud moment for myself and for the team that I worked with. To then go to the other end of the spectrum of recognizing and realizing that there are just rooms at a company like Meta with tens of thousands of people that you will never influence, that you have no control over, and that really is you have to come to peace and to rest with that being part of the experience of working at a big tech company. And I knew that going in. This is my second stint at a big tech company, having worked at Google and YouTube for 6.5 years and then Meta for almost 5. You have to understand that you're signing up for all of it. And for as much great work as we did, ultimately, you're at the mercy of decision makers who may not even know your name, let alone the work that you do, especially when they're talking about reducing staff by tens of thousands of people. And so it was extraordinarily tough to process that, let alone on the heels of what was and is like one of the greatest work accomplishments of my entire life. But that's how it goes. And I will say, if you're going to be part of a mass layoff, it's better that it happens at a place like Meta than a 5-person startup, because they afforded me the runway to do the thing that I'm not very good at typically, which is be patient and thinking about what's next. Because I had a bit of runway to be still and to try and think through what I might want to do post Meta. And candidly, and I don't know if we ever talked about it. We probably did, but it became very, very impactful and important for me that summer because I experienced an unexpected death in the family that July. And so the last thing I wanted to think about was work. And fortunately, because when I was a part of a layoff, it was Meta and I had some runway, I didn't feel like I had to rush into something I wasn't mentally or emotionally capable or ready for. So I could process a death in the family and everything that came with that, and not feel like I had to do a ton of stuff to support my family in the meantime because I had that runway that I spoke about.
Sometimes things hit us at such unexpected times, and when we're in it, it's hard to see like why it's happening or how to make sense of it. And not that there's ever probably a justification for something like getting laid off or an easy way to deal with a death in the family. But looking back, I can hear you sort of finding the grace in what was clearly a tough time. And I'm sort of wondering how that having that runway that you described led you to your current role where you work with athletes.org. And so I wonder how you could maybe explain to the audience how you learned about this particular institution and what drew you to the type of work that's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in a nutshell, for your audience, athletes.org, we are the Players Association for College Athletes. So, think of us as akin to the NFLPA or the NBPA with a couple of big differences. Number one is technically we're not a union, even though we have the underpinnings of one, because technically college athletes are not yet employees. That may certainly change in the future. The second is we're not a default. So, there's no version of me playing in the NFL where I'm not a member of the NFLPA. Virtually, that's like a certainty when you join, that league, as you join their association. In college, there is no default. That as far as an association, which means that we've built it brick by brick as far as members, of which we have almost 5,000 at this point, and they are joining of their own volition for the merit of why they should join an association at this moment in time. So that, in a nutshell, is what AO is. The reason I'm here, there's part sort of professional path and then part personal experience. On the professional front, so I mentioned launching this college athlete practice in winter of 2020. That enabled me to get to know and build a partnership with Jim Cavale, who is the founder of Influencer, which is a great and reputable company that works in the NIL space. They're a software solution that basically enables college athletes to better leverage social media and distribute content, et cetera. And so we had gotten to know each other a little bit. Our organizations did business together, and that's how I knew him. He sold that organization and then left to found athletes.org, co-founded with a former NFL player named Brandon Copeland. And so after the layoffs happened, Jim reached out to me and said, "Hey, sorry to hear about this, but wanted to talk to you about what we're doing, as we launch this new startup." And so he and I met with Brandon, and we had a chat about what they were building. And, I sort of got it, I sort of didn't. And I was not even a month out from having been part of that last round of layoffs. And so, we sort of committed to staying in touch as I reflected on what could be next, because my career thus, at that point had been primarily, if not exclusively, focused on sports, but through the lens of social and digital. And this would be something completely different and really a double clicking, if not a doubling down into college sports as an industry. And so I thought about it, and then stuff with my mother was the person who passed away that July. That happened, and the personal part of this story was going through a death in the family and being engaged with two co-founders who were launching a startup who are trying to move at the speed of light, but giving me the grace to process that and to not rush me into something I wasn't ready for. I like to say that I got to experience the humanity of our co-founders before I actually decided to go work with them. And how often can anybody say they're able to experience other people's humanity before they sign up for such a life decision? And so I felt very grateful that I got to see that side and experience that side of the both of them before deciding to jump into the deep end and join athletes.org. But I don't know if I would have joined had I not had that experience, crazily enough. And then even on the industry front, again, I'm a college sports guy. I was a fan well before I was a sports industry professional. I will be a fan well after this industry has, thrown me into the garbage. But it's my fandom that continues to tell me we are at the greatest inflection point in the history of college sports. And if there is an opportunity for me to potentially and positively impact this thing that I care so much about personally, then why not give it a shot? And that's what AO and this opportunity represents for me, and why I've been on this journey with Brandon and with Jim for, close to 2 years now.
Sometimes people talk about midlife crises because I think there is a clash between the personal and professional, and sometimes it's maybe a midlife transformation, if we can call ourselves midlife at that age, where it's like the personal and the professional actually align even more clearly. And it sounds like you experienced a version of that, which is very cool. And I think I'm seeing or maybe noticing another theme that I want to ask you about, which is that it feels like when you worked at YouTube, Google, when you worked at Meta, Instagram, while you're helping athletes, you're also more directly helping the organizations that are making money from working with those athletes. Whereas now at AO, you're at an organization that more directly helps athletes monetize themselves and build their own brands and fortunes. And I'm wondering if that's something that feels true to you in your work, and how that might impact how you view your work and also your connections with those athletes.
Yeah, so, and I don't know when this podcast will be released, but I will say my midlife crisis is coming because my wife is 17 weeks pregnant, and I'll either have the
Congratulations.
crisis before, thank you, before or after this kid arrives in December. All that to be said, I like to think that a lot of my career and frankly a lot of what I've enjoyed about the work that I've done over the past number of years has been rooted in advocacy, whether it's advocating for aspiring creators, YouTubers, et cetera, and helping them to build businesses and to support themselves off of their passions and what they want to be doing creatively. Whether it was the work I was doing at Instagram, a part of the work that I did there, a large part that went, I don't want to say unseen, but that was really internally focused, was actually advocating for athlete safety on our platform and our platforms across Meta, because we expect and hope that athletes will express themselves and engage their fans on our platforms, but their experiences were anything but safe. And so advocating for their interests, advocating for their experience was a huge part of the work that I did over the 5 years that I was at that organization. And I view my work at AO as being an extension of that advocacy, but advocating for college athletes in this moment in time when they're in a multi-billion-dollar industry, and yet they don't have, at least until we were created, an organization that is solely and independently representing their interests. And it's an industry that guys like you and I have enjoyed as fans, but it's an industry that in many ways is very backwards and doesn't recognize the value economically and otherwise that college athletes and participants are creating in this ecosystem. And our organization wants to right that wrong. And we want them to be represented. We want them to have their seat at the table. We want them to speak into their existence and their future, again, at a moment in time when everything is changing around them. And so, yeah, I think advocacy has led me in a lot of ways. And I view this as being like the next sort of version or iteration of that, even though it's, again, double clicking into college sports, which I wouldn't have thought I'd be doing if you even asked me a few years ago.
I imagine there are some people watching and listening who are going to be inspired by this journey and who see themselves as advocates. And as you were hinting at, there's probably going to be even more changes in the college athlete framework in the years, maybe even decades to come. And so if someone were to come to you and say, hey, Dave, like, I want to be an advocate for student athletes, what advice would you have for them on how to even get started on thinking about the types of jobs, work, or opportunities that might let them be advocates?
I think what's great is there are different places and ways in which you can situate yourself to do that kind of work. I like to say that there is this notion of a players association like the NFLPA or NBPA as being adversarial with their corresponding league, so to speak, because literally when you negotiate, you are essentially at other sides of the table. What I think is great about college athletics is that on the institutional side, in these athletic departments, there are so many people who are in those positions because they want to serve young people. And I tell any administrator I talk to, of whom I've got many friends and acquaintances and colleagues, that that is a tremendous common starting ground for us to be able to figure out ways that we can work together and supplement the work that we're doing to support young people. And so whether it's at an association like AO, whether it's at an institution where you're maybe serving them in different ways and obviously in different positions, whether it's serving them through your expertise or experience. We work with a network of practitioners across law, across finance, across mental health, many of whom want to be of service to young people as well, and have joined this network of practitioners that we've built to be able to work with young people who might need that kind of experience and expertise. And so there's certainly no I think, limitation in terms of how one can not only be an advocate, but figure out a way to work with this ecosystem specifically. I think it just requires a little bit of creativity and recognizing that we don't need to be beholden to any of the traditions of college athletics or the college athletics industry because it's all being changed as we speak.
Appreciate all your candid insights, your reflections, for sharing who you are, your authentic self. I feel like you're a great role model for the athletes that you work with, and we appreciate you joining us on Get a Load of This.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And yeah, let me know if I can be a guest anytime down the road.